Just what has been your journey towards doing what you do?
Oh, well, so my mother said I was talking to ghosts in my crib. And so I've been doing this for as long as I can remember. She raised me in the New Age movement. She had been psychic as a child and had turned it off because she was terrified of it. And so she was absolutely committed to that not happening to me. And so my entire childhood was filled with Seth and Ram Dass and Abraham Hicks and J.C. Knight and Est. She brought home Est when I was 6 years old, which is the earlier version of the Landmark Forum, the not kinder, gentler version of the Landmark Forum. And, all sorts of personal growth stuff and spiritual stuff. I was doing self-hypnosis by the time I was 10. I was reading tarot cards by the time I was 12. I was taking psychic development classes. I mean, we did all of this stuff together. And so I studied that. I studied religion. I studied occult stuff. I studied pop psychology, self-help, abnormal psychology, you name it. I studied it. I was a big fan of anything that explained why we work the way we work. My cousin, it's so funny. My cousin recently said something to me. She's 7 years older than me. And she said, "You were a scary kid." And I was like, "What does that mean?" And she said, "You just stared at me. It was like you took in, you were taking in everything I was saying and doing. And that was really disorienting and really like off-putting." And she was like, "It was like you were just trying to absorb me." And I was like, "Well, it kind of was, I was trying to figure out what made you tick." And she was like, "Yeah, it was, you were a scary kid." I'm like, okay. But I was quiet unless I wasn't. So it was weird. But so I studied it a lot. And then, when I was 28, so I got married at 21 to a guy who was an atheist. And then at 28, I started like coming back out of this and going, wait a minute, I believe in this stuff and I've abandoned it because of him. And so I started coming back out of it, and then all sorts of stuff opened up for me. I started, I was getting, my intuition just opened up like mad, and I was getting all sorts of psychic impressions. And I did, I did some impromptu psychic readings without cards for the first time ever, because a friend of mine roped me into trying to teach a class for him. And I ran out of things to say at, 3/4 of the way through. And he was like, "Oh, just do readings for everybody." I was like, "I don't do that. I don't have my cards." And he's like, no. I was like, "Okay, it's fine." And I scared myself because I was so accurate. And so, and then I ended up moving in with a bunch of people I met at the Renaissance Fair after my divorce. And they all turned out to be shamans and witches and pagans of some kind or another. And that's where I learned ritual. It's where I understood what a shaman was. That's where I learned what it was. I'd never heard of it before. And where Grandmother Spider ended up calling me. And then I ended up on walkabout for a year and living on $350 a month of unemployment insurance and the kindness of strangers. And I ended up driving like 14,000 miles in that journey, going where Spirit took me from one place to another. And so it's been quite the journey. I started writing a book on that journey because everybody was asking me the same questions. And so I sat down at one of the spaces and wrote like 45 pages of this book. And then over the next 20 years, I would just keep adding to it. And every time I figured out what worked for me on my personal journey for healing. And over the course of time, I determined that format wasn't really effective, because I would come back to people and say, "Hey, did you ever finish that book?" And they would say, "I'm still actively thinking about chapter X." And I'm like, "Well, how long have you been actively thinking about it?" And they're like, 3 months, 2 years. And I'm like, "Okay, you're stuck and you don't even know you're stuck. So it's got to be a program, not a book." And so I transitioned it into a program in 2017. And I've been running those programs ever since. And that's what they represent is, I don't know, when you first get started in spiritual growth work, people are immediately going, "You got to do shadow work. You have to do shadow work." Yeah, shadow work is relevant, but you're not ready to do shadow work until you have found the bandwidth to change, which is, finding mental, emotional, and energetic safety. If you don't have that, you don't have anything, right? You don't have the bandwidth to change. And then you have to solidify your energetic container, your sense of self, your identity. Until you have that, you don't have a container in which to hold your shadow work. And so my programs teach people how to do those things. That's what I walk people through. And so right now, I have those programs in place, but I also have a certification program where I'm teaching coaches how to teach my programs. And so that's the next stage of the work for me. I started doing that last year. So yeah, that's sort of the short version.
There's a couple things there that I want to follow up on. First, I'm
Okay.
curious about your process of writing a book for so many years. Just what did that look like for you? And what did you find worked and didn't work?
Yeah, so the book was mostly for me to remember what I had done, right? So it was almost a grimoire or book of shadows or something, right? It was me just reminding myself what worked, so that if I needed to do another layer of the work, because there's a spiral that you go through, and there are certain spokes, there are spokes on the spiral that are sort of your core issues, right? And you come back to them over and over and over again. And I'm like, okay, I want to know how I did this last time, right? So part of it was that. Part of it was me just wanting to share the same things with people without saying the same things every 3 days. That was the beginning of it, obviously. But basically, it just sat on my hard drive for years. It just sat on my hard drive, and every time I found something new, I just dumped something into it. It wasn't until I think it was 183 pages when I turned it into my programs. And that was just text, no chapter splits, nothing, just text. And at 60 pages, I had given it to my boyfriend at the time, who I'd lived with for a year and a half. And he went and read it and came back from his parents' house, and he'd read it forward and then backwards and then forward again to sort of help me with editing. And he walked in the door going, oh, and I'm like, what? He said, you need to put a warning on this book that says, do not read this book too fast or your head will explode. And I was like, okay. All right, noted. So it was one of those things where I would give it away to friends and say, hey, what do you, tell me what you think. And then I would come back, 3 years, 2 years, 3 months, 2 years later, and they were all in a different part of the book. They were all got stuck in different places. But I would say, look, if you wandered off and you got bored and you didn't care, that's fine. Just let me know. And they're like, no, actively thinking about this thing. I'm like, okay. So, I don't know. I mean, it wasn't really a goal to publish it. I've written a couple of books that I published, and I thought about publishing this, but it wasn't really a goal to publish it. And I did. I put it out as an ebook briefly, but then, again, had the same responses, right? So, it's different than writing a book that you intend to publish. This is more of a, keeping track of things thing. And I like that it's in the course format now, because now I can add videos and I can do audios and things like that. And so, the course is much more robust than a book ever could have been.
Looking back, is there a particular moment of your life that you can remember that kind of put you on this path?
Well, as I said, I've been sort of raised on this path, but I can tell you the moment that put me back on it. As I said, my husband was an atheist. And one day this fundamentalist minister and his new convert came to my front door, and they were like, we'd like to talk to you about the Bible. And I was like, well, he said, what do you believe? And I said, you don't want to know what I believe. because I was raised in metaphysics and all this, and I speak fluent Bible because I went to so many different churches over the years. So I speak fluent Bible. And he's like, no, I really do want to know what you believe. And I said, I'm happy to have the conversation with you, but you need to know that when we're done, he's going to have a crisis of faith. Right? I was pointing to the new convert, and he's like, well, that's fine. I'll worry about him. I'm like, okay. And, I couldn't let him in the house because my husband would have had a cow. And so we sat on the front stoop, and for 2.5 hours, he and I had this amazing spiritual conversation about the nature of the Bible and the nature of God and the nature of how things work the way they work. And at the end, I was re-galvanized into my beliefs, and his person was having a crisis of faith. And he and I both agreed that we'd had a great conversation, and that was it for him. But for me, it was the moment when I came back into working in my world, right? To being engaged in the spiritual world, to talking to my guides, to really being aware and paying attention to the spiritual world again, which I had basically avoided for a few years because of my husband. Yeah.
So after that point in time, you mentioned that you spent some time living with shamans. How did that impact you and your current practices today?
So many ways. Oh my God. So we affectionately refer to that as the magical house, right? And so it's because it was this 3-story, 6-bedroom, 4-bath Victorian house. It was there was a ley line running through the yard, and the shaman who was the house warden pulled the ley line in to wake up the house, and so the house was awoken, and we had ghosts, and we had all sorts of stuff going on. We actually had magical rules for the house because every time something went wrong, we created a new rule. Because it was like no mucking about with time and space in the confines of the property, because everybody was late that day because whoever it did it messed up time for the house, and there was all kinds of stuff that we went through. But the most relevant piece was that I was in this working circle with 4 other people, and the process of they were all very adept at ritual, and I had never done ritual. I had done a lot of manifestation and metaphysics and things like that. And so they taught me ritual, which is a very potent version of magic, right? Ritual is the way that we tap into the archetypal realms, right? And so when you tap into the Jungian sorts of constructs, the collective unconscious and the archetypes and the connections to the earth, and that brings it into the physical beingness, it's very different than working up here in the astral where you're like envisioning law of attraction, that sort of thing. And so it dug me into those aspects, and that made me remember intuitively, if not consciously, lifetime after lifetime in which I had done this work in the past. And so it connected me into those pieces that I just knew. And so I was very conscious at the time to not do too much study. I wanted to be with my intuition. And the nice thing about having this group of people around me is that I would say, I want to do this. And they would say, well, that's appropriate. I'm like, okay, why? Right? And they would tell me, and I'm like, oh, okay. But my intuition, it was being validated, and that was super important. Everybody who goes through a spiritual awakening, who starts to practice and facilitate for others in any sort of way, really needs that validation. They need to have that sense of, this isn't all in my head. I'm not making this up. I'm not just, making good guesses. This is actually valid, right? And so they did a lot of that validation for me. We also did a huge amount of healing work for each other. Huge, massive. And so, we walked through these very difficult journeys together. I remember, so the people, these were all people I met at the Renaissance Fair. So we all worked the Renaissance Fair, and we served as the overnight space for a lot of people who worked the Renaissance Fair during the fair season. And one night we had 30 people sleeping in the house. And at 3:00 in the morning, the 30 of us got up, or were still up, I think. And somebody did a grail ritual, which is, you have this chalice and you fill it with something to drink, and everybody in the room puts their energy into the cup. And we did this at 3 a.m. when the veil is thinnest between the worlds, and we put 30 people's worth of energy into the cup, 30 magical people's worth of energy into the cup. And my friend and I, who were living there together, he and I both we were the first two to drink from the cup, and without telling each other what we wished for, because that's what you do. You wish for something, you intend something, and you drink from the cup to bring it to fruition. Both of us wished to be on our spiritual paths. And over the course of the next 2 months, our lives just exploded and fell apart, because if you ask to be on the express train, things have to give. And so it was at the point where things were happening so quickly and so overwhelmingly that we kept saying, this is supposed to be fun, right? This is the roller coaster ride. It's supposed to be fun, right? And so we would pick up the phone and we'd call the other person, and they, instead of saying hello, you would hear, we. And we're like, okay, what happened? Because we meant, oh my God, this is supposed to be fun. I don't think it's fun yet. But I don't remember much of what happened to me, but for him, he actually lost his funding, his financial aid, in the final semester of his engineering degree, and thus could not finish his engineering degree because he was kicked out of that semester of school, and then was like, okay, I'm clearly not supposed to be here. So, but that's the level of stuff that was happening at the time when we were calling each other up, because I wasn't living at the house yet at that point. That was just before I moved up there. So my life was falling apart. I just basically dumped my entire life. I divorced my husband, had him take the dog. We sold the house. I sold my business. I quit the nonprofit I'd been working for, and I moved up to live with a bunch of people I met at the Renaissance Fair. So, my former business partner said that I'd run off and join the circus, and he wasn't really wrong. But yeah, so that was the impact. I mean, they had such a huge impact on me and my practice today, and I wouldn't know any of the ritual stuff that I knew today, or have gone to any of the places that I've been. I mean, they brought me to the festivals that taught me more things, and I mean, they really introduced me to this entire journey. Somebody's upset. The library, they're not supposed to be yelling.
So as you're going down this path of spiritual development, what are some of the challenges that you're facing, and how do you overcome them?
Some of the challenges that I'm facing now. So the most recent thing that I have been dealing with, and this happens for a lot of spiritual practitioners, is this sense of there's a fear of being seen somewhere along the line. And for me, I was fine with, 20,000, 30,000 followers. I'm okay. It's a small number. It's not a big deal, But I am actually in the process of up-leveling significantly in that, and being seen at a much higher level. And there were fears associated with fame that came into play for me. And I'd already gotten over the you might be killed for your gifts thing. I'd already gotten past that. And I'd already gotten past the, being scheduled to within an inch of my life, which was another, I've got a very high value on freedom. But there was a thing around fame and safety that I had an issue with. And so you'll love this, right? So I was telling my guides, I'm like, I feel like if I'm famous, then I'm going to lose a lot of my freedom around, I'm going to have security guards and, not be able to leave my house and all blah, 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 blah. And it's so funny, very funny. My guides had Neil Donald Walsh's people reach out. I don't know if you know who he is, but he wrote the Conversations with God books. And, he's written like 15 books, and he's one of the best known people in the sort of new age world. If anybody's famous in that field, it's him, right? And so I got to interview him because they reached out to ask for him to come on my podcast to help promote his book, right? And so I got to talk to him after the fact, and I was like, what's your life like? And he's like, well, what do you mean, what's my life like? He's like, don't go out to dinner because, people come up and interrupt my dinner and they ask me questions and try and tell me things. He's like, I don't like to be interrupted. And I was like, oh, okay. And so a few days after that, I'm in pizza place here, and I live in Boquete, Panama, and we had done a video for one of the local relocation places, and somebody recognized us from the video. And they were like, oh my God, it's you. I know you. And I'm like, okay. And they were like, oh, this. And I was like, oh yeah. They said, you want to come have dinner with us? And I realized I didn't care if people came up and asked me questions, and I didn't care if they interrupted me. And I was like, oh, I actually really enjoyed that dinner, and that was fun for me. And I'm like, okay, good. And so I thought, well, okay, that's very interesting. And then like a month later, John Rhys Davies, you know who that is?
I don't.
He was Gimli in The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay.
Dwarf,
cool.
Right?
Yeah.
John Rhys Davies is in Boquete. It's this tiny little town in the middle of Panama where they got 25,000 people. He happened to date a woman who was doing a fundraiser in town, and he came in to help her raise money by getting pictures taken with people and stuff. And nobody was in line when we were there. And so I got to talk to his daughter and him about what life was like being that famous, right? Because Lord of the Rings is huge, right? And she's like, yeah, some days people recognize him and he gets swamped and asked for autographs and stuff. But, some days people don't see him at all. We're just have a normal life. And I'm like, okay. So, the universe clearly thought I hadn't had enough instructions on this. But if you ask your guides and you pay attention, they will send you what you need, even if you live in the middle of freaking nowhere in Panama, right? And so, that's been the latest thing for me, is the identity shift of shifting into this new way of being as a more visible person.
With the growth that you're talking about, what is your day-to-day like as a coach and doing this type of transformative work?
Yeah, so I've just launched my new podcast, which is 5 days a week. And so a lot of my last few weeks have been about getting a lot of extra episodes into the can so that I don't have to be podcasting every single day. So that's what the last few weeks have been about. But before that, I was working on up-leveling my systems for my company. So last year I did a complete rebrand of my programs because they had been focused on the personal growth side of things, and post-COVID, people just don't have the energy for that. They really just want the magic stuff. And so I rebranded around the magical side of stuff, around the woo-woo. In fact, my programs are it's a woo series. It's Welcome to the Woo, Woo Squared, Woo You. So, but we did that last year. And then this year has been about consolidating our systems so that we're not trying to have so many different SaaS services connect to each other, and instead just we're switching to a go high level version. And so that everything is all in one platform with a very few exceptions. And that has been quite the journey, trying to get all of that transitioned over because I had so much collateral. And then, my days are, I'm either podcasting or I'm doing a podcast for somebody else, or I'm doing coaching calls for my clients. All of my coaching call programs, all of my programs are sort of small group, high touch. And so I have discussion groups that I monitor and answer and do things with. And then I have the coaching calls themselves. And, so there's a fair amount of touch involved with the connection with the clients that I'm working with, as well as, private clients that I work with from time to time. So I don't do a lot of private client work. I really prefer to work in the groups because the work that I do lends itself best in a group environment, because it gives you an opportunity to see yourself reflected in others, so that it normalizes your experience, and it lets you learn how to be supportive and be supported, and in a group environment. And that's sort of a reparenting thing and stuff like that. So I really prefer to work with people in that environment if I can. Or I'm also right now working on enrolling people in my retreat that's happening in November. That'll be the first retreat we've done since 2019. And so I'm super excited about doing that here in Panama. I'm super excited to share Panama with people, because I'm so in love with the country. We moved here 2 years ago, and I'm just like, oh, this is the best thing we ever did. So that was an adventure unto itself. So, leaving behind my family had been in the US for 400 years on both sides of my family. My family's been there since pre-Revolutionary War on both sides. So it was a big deal to leave the US.
What's been your experience with that?
Leaving the US?
Yeah.
So my stress levels have gone through the floor. I dropped 25 pounds in the first 6 months I was here without trying. And that's just because the ambient stress levels were so much lower than they are in the US. And the food is so much better quality here. So, we just get such great food here. The fruits and the vegetables are amazing. My diet has changed dramatically. The beef that they sell here is very good. And so my beef consumption has dropped off dramatically. And we've eaten a lot more fish, a lot more vegetables and fruits. And so my diet has shifted rather dramatically in just incidentally, because that's what's available and that's what's good here. And the community has been amazing. I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of hard. I'm very good at meeting new people. My mother was military, so we moved every few years. One of my superpowers is finding people and making good friends, and just doing it quickly. And I had a very hard time. We moved from Boston to Richmond, Virginia, and we were there for 2.5 years, a year and a half during the pandemic. So really only a year where we were able to go out and make friends. But I had a hard time. And I was going to 3 events a week to go out and find people. And we never really got stitched into that community. And that was the big reason why we chose to leave Richmond, aside from the fact that the stress was insane. I had to leave because of the energy in the US. And when we got here, it's been so easy and so quick and so fast to make strong friendships, really tight friendships. And I realized it's because, you're living in a space where people have self-selected for being adventurous and outgoing and friendly. And, you have to be those things in order to leave the country and make friends and survive in another country, right? And, they're flexible, and they're willing to learn, and all of the things that are required to be my friend, right? It's so much easier to find people who are in alignment with me here in the community of people who have moved abroad, right? So it's been really good. And because we picked a community which is 20% people who are from out of the country, we haven't had to be as hardcore about learning Spanish, although we have learned Spanish, but we can operate a lot in English, which is such a gift, especially if you're dealing with a medical issue and you're the last thing you want to do is try and fumble your way through that with Google Translate when you're trying to when your life is on the line, right? That would be bad. So but it's been a wonderful experience. It really has. And, has it been challenging? Yes, but in all the right ways. So, it's delightful. I'm absolutely in love with this country. And, we go out every day and we go, we get to live here. It's like living on vacation. We live at 3,500 feet up the side of a volcano. So it's, the weather here is really nice year round, temperature wise. And, half the year is rainy and half the year it's sunny. And, I love both. So that works for me.
First of all, that's amazing. What I want to touch on, though, is taking that leap and pushing your own boundaries and also overcoming anxiety, self-doubt, fear. What are some of your ways for doing that?
So I'll talk about it in terms of the move to Panama, because that was a big stretch, right? We literally sold everything we owned except for 6 suitcases and our dog. We literally arrived with 6 suitcases and the dog. That was everything we owned. We didn't have anything in storage. Nothing, right? We had half a box of keepsakes at my cousin's house in the basement. That was it. And we're going to go back and collect those. But we had never actually been to Panama before we moved here. So we made the decision based on watching a lot of videos. And so, this is the thing. So when you're going through something at this scale, I'm going to talk about it like a ritual, because it really is, right? When you're going through something at this scale, you're literally walking through an initiation rite, okay? And the definition of initiation is you're going from one state of beingness, one identity, to another. And there's no way to know what is on the other side of that door. Even if somebody told you in great detail what was on the other side of the door, you could not, from your own experience on this side of the door, fully grasp what they're talking about, because you will have a completely different perspective on the other side of the door. So somebody recently asked me, they were like, well, did Panama work out to be the way you expected? And I was like, I don't know that I had expectations, right? I didn't, because I knew it was an initiation. And I knew that the other side of the door was going to be something completely different than what I expected. And therefore, there wasn't a reason to set expectations. And I think one of the biggest challenges that people have is that, we set expectations, and we either, in the US, our expectations are insanely high, right? We're like, it's got to be perfect or it's all screwed up, right? It's like we have these horrible expectations. But we also have these horrible expectations of, oh my God, what if? And our what ifs are always, what if it all sucks, right? It's all terrible. We don't what if it's perfect. What if it's wonderful? What if it's great? What if it's neutral? What if it's okay? We don't what if the other pieces. We only what if the horrible pieces. And so I think that that's the other piece, is that I didn't do the what if the horrible pieces. I did we are fully adaptable humans capable of figuring stuff out. We'll make it work. And, we're looking at this move and going, this is, he and I, my current husband and I have both always wanted to live abroad. And so for us, this was the completion of a life dream. And we were like, it's a grand adventure. We're going to see what happens, right? People are like, what if you hate it? I said, we've got 6 suitcases and the dog. How hard could it be to move again? The hard part was getting rid of all of our crap. And so, and that was the hard part, is divesting yourself of a lifetime's worth of stuff, right? And all of the memories that you have stored and all the different things. And, can I get this again? Da-da-da. No, you can't get it again. You'll get something else. It'll be fine, right? Thankfully for me, this was the 3rd time I had gotten rid of everything I owned. And so it wasn't as big of a heart attack for me as it was for my husband. It was his first time letting go of everything, and he's a Taurus, so he likes to nest. So a little bit more work for him, but he ultimately got there. And so, the journey was a lot about, there's a lot of ways in which you could say, I don't know enough. I can't get there. I don't know enough. I can't figure it out. It's too hard. It's too this, it's too that. And, did we run across those? Yeah. We paid for a guidebook from somebody who has facilitated this for people. Best money we ever spent, because put a lot of our fears to rest, because she gave us a little checklist and we're like, okay, we're doing the checklist and we're getting it done on time, and okay, yeah, we're good, right? So helpful. So, getting help from somebody who's been there before, that's another way to get over your nerves, right? Follow a checklist from somebody else who knows and has been there. And, get advice from people. So it also gave us access to a Facebook group, which gave us a lot of places to get advice from people who were already there. We're like, hey, where do we find this? How do we do that? What's this about? What's that about? And then they would say things like, oh, don't do this. And we're like, oh, we've almost made that mistake, right? So, lots of things like that. And, but, a lot of it's just about believing in your own ability to be adaptable, and this is the thing I think people don't give themselves enough credit for. They don't say that. They don't look at their lives. They say, oh, my life has been so hard. I've had all of these horrible things happen and blah, blah, blah. But they don't look at it and say, my life has been challenging, and look at how amazing I've been at managing that. Look at how awesome I've been at adapting to new situations. Look at how well I have managed to protect myself and be able to adjust and make things work for me, even if the situation wasn't ideal. Look at how adaptable I am, right? They don't say that, but that's true. I don't care how challenged or unchallenged, the more challenges you've had in life, the more adaptable you've become, because you had to, right? And if you lean into your adaptability and your ability to just sort of be with what is, then you could do anything, right? It's like, well, I'll figure it out, right? Who is that lady? There's somebody who says everything is figure outable. I can't remember her name right now, but she's right. Just stop awfulizing, that's really the key. So, a lot of the work that I do in my first program is all about fear and anxiety and worry and dread and self-doubt and all of this inner and outer judgments and all of that stuff. But, the short answer is what I just told you. There's a lot more to it in the long run, but anxiety is just feeling like you don't fit, feeling like you're not okay as you are. And so, a lot of it's just about undoing that.
From a super high overview, are there any tips that you would give to a listener for just how to connect with their own energy, how to connect with their inner higher self?
So quiet and lack of distraction, right? Because you can't hear your inner voice if you're being bombarded with sounds and noises and, video games and screens and, whatever. If you're running 1,000,000 miles a minute, you're not going to hear your inner self. It's a quiet voice. And that quiet voice shows up when you are still. So, the more still you can become, and let me be clear, I don't mean physically still. You can get to stillness while you're jogging. You can get to stillness while you're walking on a treadmill or walking in nature. It's not about physical stillness, although some people do sit meditation and have physical stillness. But I've never been a stillness kind of person from the meditation perspective. I've always been better at the moving meditation, dancing and things like that, chanting. But the point is that when you're not thinking, when you're just being, that's when the voice of your inner self, your higher self, comes into play, right? And so, those pieces are the pieces that are at the core of what you're dealing with. And so, in terms of, sorry, did you have another question?
Please continue.
Oh, okay. In terms of getting in touch with yourself, the other thing I would say is get away from the goal. You got to let go of the goal. Everybody's like, oh, I've got to be enlightened and I have to evolve. I have to become the highest version of my authentic self. And, we're always growing and we're always changing and we're always in process on things. Richard Bach wrote a wonderful book called Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. And inside, it's a book within a book. And inside that book is the Messiah's handbook. And one of the quotes there is that, if you ever wonder if your mission on the planet is done, check for this. If you're still here, you're not done, right? And that's the truth, is that if you're still here, you're not done. So stop waiting to be done. Right? People are like, oh, it's the journey, not the destination. And that's true. But I remember when I didn't understand what that meant, how frustrating that was. Because I'm like, what does it mean? I've got a place, I've got to be, blah, blah, blah. So I understand that can be challenging and frustrating. And so I'm going to say it differently for you, which is, when you are living in the goal of being at the destination of enlightenment, you are living in the future. You cannot live in the future and hope to attain enlightenment, because enlightenment only exists in the present. So you have to be in the now in order to actually get to the future enlightenment, right? Because the present is the only place where anything exists. Everything else is just an illusion, because time doesn't exist. Right? So we are living in the eternal moment of now. And therefore, time does not exist. And so the only point at which we, in our physical beingness on this physical planet, which is subject to time, space, the only place where we intersect with that eternal moment of now is in the present. Right? And so everything else is just an illusion of time, space that's created out of that eternal moment of now. So we want the access point, which is right now. It's about being here and now on the journey, because nothing else exists in this quantum reality, right? Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay. All right.
I feel like, as it relates to some of this stuff, backtracking to earlier in the conversation, I think it might be helpful for people out there to maybe have an explanation for what you mean by shadow work when we were talking about that. Just, again, high level for somebody who has never heard of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Shadow work is, by definition, looking in the dark places inside of yourself where you've shoved the pieces of yourself that you don't want to look at so that you can hide them away. Shadow work is going into those corners and those closets and digging those out and looking at them and integrating them. So that's the high level version.
And then, as it relates to the archetypes and the universal consciousness, there's a lot of different theories on those, but if you were to advise somebody on how do you connect more to those things, what would you say?
So I would say that the question isn't so much how, but why. Because, when you're first getting started, you're like, oh, I have to do all of these things, but you don't know why, right? And I find that a lot of people who are just getting started try and do things that aren't really necessary. They go looking for answers in the spiritual world that are probably more mundane questions than spiritual questions. And they try to master skills that aren't really necessary for them to have a happy life and for them to move forward in their work. So, universal consciousness is accessible. I mean, the easiest pathway is through your guides and your higher self, right? That's the easiest pathway. It requires the least amount of work because you already have access to your higher self and your guides are already talking to you. So that's the super fast path. And that I see that there's a lot of use to being connected to universal consciousness on a regular basis. Archetypes are very specific things, and you use them for very specific purposes. They're not things you're going to want to stay connected to on a long-term basis. For one, the nature of their existence and the nature of our existence are not compatible for long-term connection, unless you want to become very, very strange, because they're bigger than you and they will impact you in that way. They will drag you into their energetic state, which will make you very, very strange. And so, there's archetypal stuff is stuff that you tap into for the purposes of doing ritual in a specific way, or if you're trying to make a specific shift, or if you're trying to power some sort of energetic that is working in a specific way. But even then, I wouldn't stay connected in for long term. I'd probably tap in and out on those things. So those are things that I would not recommend trying to do as a newbie, right? Archetypes are things that you need to have an understanding of how they interrelate with the physical world and with the metaphors that you're using for the rituals that you're doing, and how they tie into each other and the energetics of those things. And it can get a little dicey if you don't know what you're doing. So I would not start with that as a newbie. Connecting into your higher consciousness, absolutely all day long. That's a great thing to do on a regular basis. Just because, why would you not, right? That's accessing more of who you already are. And it's like, yeah, why not? More is better, right?
What made you want to start sharing this stuff, this knowledge that you had picked up, and creating a podcast for yourself?
Well, I was teaching classes in my home for years before I did the podcast. I moved to the podcast because we were moving and building up a bunch of people to take classes from, moving from Boston to Virginia was a lot to try and to make that shift. But my mother was a teacher. My father was a teacher. I just am a teacher. And so, I share what I know. Initially, I did it the way that most stage 3 teachers do, which is, I did it because it made me feel good about myself. Look what I know. I can share it. I can help people, blah, blah, blah. Right. And it was a validation thing for me to be able to say, hey, look, I know this stuff. But, over the years, as I've evolved in my own journey and done my own work, it's more of I enjoy the process of having the conversation, and I enjoy the deepening of the conversations I get to have with people when they've already listened to a bunch of the stuff I've already said. So I get to talk at a higher level with people because they already have the understanding of the lower level stuff to be able to have the higher level conversations now. So, I've been doing this work for 50 years effectively. I mean, this year will be 50 years. The podcast is a great way for me to get people educated up to a certain level where I can start to have those higher level conversations with them. And that's what I really enjoy, is having those higher level conversations, because my students ask me questions, and that gives me a different way of looking at things. And the best gift you can give a shaman is a new perspective, because it changes everything, right? And so I love having those higher level conversations. I love having people ask me questions I've never thought to ask, because I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Let me think about that, right? That makes me happy. And so, at a certain point in your journey, studying with other teachers doesn't really do it for you, because, they're probably teaching the same stuff you're teaching, or you've already learned before, or whatever. And so it's the gifts that you get from your students asking questions that becomes the great aha, cool rock and roll moments, right? Yeah.
In this line of work that you're in, what are some of the most common things that people come to you with, issues in their lives or knowledge that they're seeking? And off the top of your head, is there any one particular success story that you've had?
Yeah. So the things that people come to me with most often are the ones they're having a spiritual awakening, and they've had a life where life was not easy as a child. So my people tend to be overachievers, and they're, perfectionists and control freaks, and they got a plan and a backup plan and a backup plan for their backup plan. And they're all empaths. They feel deeply what other people feel. They get run over by other people's strong emotions. They have a hard time breaking up with people because they feel like they're still connected to them, and they are. And there's just a lot of different pieces and parts that all my people share. They've got this massive quest for knowledge, right? They woke up one day. This isn't everybody, but it's a significant percentage of my people. They woke up one day and had to their spiritual awakening. They went, oh my God, I've got this huge mission. I have no idea what it is, but it's huge, and I don't feel like I'm ready for it, and I'm late, right? And they have no idea what they're supposed to be doing, but they know they're late, and they know it's huge, what they're supposed to do. And so that's a lot of my people too. And that is a description of somebody who's part of the 100,000 people on the planet right now to up-level it. And so, this is where a lot of my people come in. And so they come in with this sort of complex PTSD background, right? And they don't even know what that is. They've never heard of that before most of the time, by the way. Some of them have been to therapy and they found it worked for a while, but then it stopped working. And now they're just left going, well, but I still feel like I need work done. And what do I do? And so things like that. And most of the time they're just anxious and unhappy, and they feel like there's got to be more to life than this, and there's this magic, and they want the magic in their life, and they want to expand the magic, but they feel overwhelmed and exhausted and burned out and afraid that they can't hold more, but they desperately want more. And that's sort of in a nutshell, who my people are. And the person who comes to mind most significantly is this woman that I worked with, and her name was Laura, and she had done so much work. I mean, so much. She'd been to years and years of therapy. She'd been to so many different programs, and she'd made inch by inch progress, but nothing significant. And she was so frustrated, and she was almost hopeless. She got on the phone with me and she was almost hopeless. She's like, I've spent all this money, I've done all this work, and I'm still not happy. And I said, I can get you there. And she was like, okay. She made the leap. And she said, I've got this wonderful testimonial video from her on my website. It's just, she and I were having a conversation at the end of her program, and she was just in tears. And she's like, I honestly thought when I signed up, she said, I'm going to spend all this money again, and it's not going to work, and I'm just going to be back in the same place. And she said, and it's not true. I'm being healed, and I feel totally different. I don't feel like the person I was before. I'm a different person now. And, I can't take credit for her growth. She did that, but I knew the path to get her there. Right. And that's the difference, is that I knew the places that hadn't given. I could see the pieces that weren't being addressed, and I could help her through that. Now, she had to take the steps. If she didn't take the steps, she wouldn't have gotten anywhere. This is one of the things that the beginner coaches don't grasp, is they feel like they have to take on responsibility for the outcome of their clients. And it's like, you can't. Only they can walk the journey. You can show them the road. You can walk down the road with them, but if they refuse to put one foot in front of the other, you can't help them, right? So, her progress is hers, and that's her gift to herself. And she has made such great strides. And, a lot of, one of the biggest evolutions she had in the program was not actually part of our curriculum. It was part of an interaction that she and I had outside of it. And, where she was needed to stand up for herself and be push back and do the thing. And I was like, I'm so proud of you. Right. She did such great work. And I just look at her and I'm like, but she did, she worked it, and she's not alone. I mean, I've had a lot of people come through the program and made strides like that. But for her, she had done so much work before that didn't work. that I just was like, oh, I'm so glad that the dam broke for her. And she actually, and all the work she had done before was suddenly relevant, right? I mean, once that dam broke, all of the stuff she had ever spent time and money on it came along with her, and it amplified her progress. So she once the dam broke, she just like went, woof. She really just shot up because she had done all the stuff prior to. She just was still stuck behind the dam when she met me. Yeah.
The last question that I have for you, again, from kind of a broad overview, if you were to just tell someone, or if someone were to come to you and ask, how can I balance my personal life, my work life, and self-care? What would you say to them?
So I have this conversation with my clients all the time, so I know exactly what I would say, which is the very first thing I would say is that your work is only paying for 50% of your day. The average person is awake for 16 hours, and we generally work 8. So your work is paying for 50% of your day, which means it should get 50% of your energy. But most people are spending 100% of their energy at work and then wondering why they have no energy for their life. And so the quiet quitting that was going on a couple of years ago, that was such a big deal. Everybody talked about quiet quitting. That was just getting sane. That was not quiet quitting. That was actually having a sane work life. It's not leaving it all on the field. That is just corporate speak for let us have all your energy for half price, right? So that's number one. And that's whether you work for yourself or somebody else. I'm going to say that because I work for myself, and and then in terms of, the other half is that you have to have a plan for what you're going to do with your downtime, especially if you work for yourself, because if you don't and you get bored, you'll go back to working.
Yeah.
And so you have to make a plan for what you want to do when you're not working, and just make a list and be like, oh, I don't have anything to do. Let me go work on something on my list. Let me go make a piece of art, or, go out and have dinner with friends, or, go play a game of pickleball, or go for a walk, or whatever. Just, if you don't have that written down, your default is going to be to go back to what your neurons are used to, which is going back to work.
That's smart. I like that.
I also recommend that people work in one place in their house and not in every place in their house, because then that way, when you close the door to the place that you work, you close the door on the work. And then if you find yourself working, either in your head or on your computer or whatever, somewhere else in your house, you stop, go into your office, close the door, and stay there until you finish working. And if you find that you're living in your office, then you have a problem.
That's awesome. I appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on and giving an interview.
Oh, my pleasure.
I appreciate everything you said.
Yeah, my pleasure. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'll follow up with you on social media. Keep in touch with everything that you're doing. And your podcast is awesome as well. So
awesome.
I encourage you to keep going with that.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got the Spirit Sherpa one, but I just launched Spirit Guides. So Spirit Sherpa is phasing into Spirit Guides. So I'm excited about the new one too. So it's going to be good.
Yeah. So any way that people can contact you or info that you want to leave?
Yeah. So Kelly at kellesparta.com, just the way you see it on the screen, because Kelly is spelled K-E-L-L-E. And the Spirit Guides podcast.com will take you to my Spirit Guides podcast website, and Spirit Sherpa Podcast is still up and running. That's got 360 episodes of stuff, so a huge amount of backlog for you to dig through if you want good stuff. So yeah, it's good stuff. Awesome.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Kelly. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks for having me, Ty. This was great. Have a good one.
You too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.